Hello again. We are now moving into section 19 in our tutorial document, and the topic for this section is Razor. Now, when we started out the course, um, it's been a while now, we learned a little bit about Razor and Razor directives, and basically that Razor is a view engine that's built into this environment. And the truth is, Razor can be used in any ASP.NET web application. It does not have to strictly be MVC. So you guys should know that. The reason that we see it in this architecture is it lends itself well to the way that this approach works. Um, if you delve into doing things with Razor, there is a whole syntax you will learn. So the whole goal here isn't to teach you everything Razor, in a couple pages of a book. If you look at the Unit 8 folder where we talk about this stuff, I do have you go back, I think it's chapter 3 or 4, to review the little section of readings that we have there to familiarize yourself with how it works. But the long and the short of it is the reason that we use Razor is so that we don't have to, like PHP or traditional ASP, use uh, regular HTML, put in some special delimiters, drop in some code, close that, put some more HTML in, open it up again, like intermingle the code in a weird way. This allows you to basically write that code directly in by just simply prefacing it with an @ sign and then special little directives. So there's no real weird like opening and closing tags and things like that. And what that allows you to do is write code that's basically more fluid. So they begin here by talking a little bit about how the the whole structure works. So let's first talk about how things are templated and then move out to your screen. So when we create these view files, right? The view files often will have these placeholders. So any one of these that we pull up. So let's just pull up the index view. And anywhere where we see that @ sign, it's pulling in information. So these are Razor directives. And notice how here we have a loop, right? And inside the loop, we have a table structure. We're not switching between languages here as much as we would. Or like in regular ASP.NET, we would do this kind of thing. We have to open the tag, do some code, close that tag, switch back to HTML, etc. That's not necessary here. So there's that kind of that smooth flow. But this structure here, really, wherever you're seeing the Razor directives, they're really kind of like placeholders in a sense, right? It's a format into which we will inject stuff for output to the browser. So that's why the document shows the template. We have whatever information we have, usually from a database or some other file. We marry the two together, and then we push it out to the user as something they see, right? And the user doesn't care what or how it gets there, just as long as it works, right? And really, the developer should, I think, feel the same way. If it works, it works, right? Now, Razor is kind of a new format in terms of this environment. We started out with traditional ASP.NET, or actually traditional ASP scripting. Then they moved in the .NET part of it and made it the ASPX files. And if you guys took the .NET 1 class, that's really kind of the approach that we focused on there. So we would work with ASPX pages. We would combine them with C#, and we would put in those delimiter tags and do all sorts of work. We'd have content placeholders and things like that, and master pages, and it all worked off of that environment. The beautiful thing about Razor is you can still use that old stuff. You want to use, antiquated ASP scripting? Fine. You want to use the ASPX controls and techniques? Fine. You want to use Razor? Great. You can combine them all together. Chances are, though, that if you become proficient with Razor, you tend to abandon the older approaches, really because this lends itself better to the modern web. But you will find yourself as application developers working in the field where you're going to find scenarios where you do have to like rescue old applications, and you also have the scenario where stuff is already working. Why on earth do you want to rewrite it? So you got to think about those things as you're working in those environments. If you're writing from scratch, you probably would abandon the older approach typically, right? So if you look at this little explanation here, this is something you might want to review a little bit for testing purposes. Hint, hint. So those kind of little points that I sometimes make a multiple choice question or something like that. So please read that. All right. So in terms of the format, now we talked about this early on, but this is kind of a little bit of a review. If we were doing traditional ASPX, we would still write the same code for the most part. Notice how we would do it though. If I wanted to create a table that was generating content from a database, and my database had 20 rows of information, and I don't want to write these table entries 20 times over, pulling in each record, it makes more sense to put it in a loop. So I start to write a loop. But in ASPX, we have to tell it we're doing ASP code. So we start with the ASP delimiter, the bracket and percent sign. We write our code, right? Basically a C# code, folks. You guys are picking up on that. Then we close it because now we got to switch to HTML. So we get a little bit of HTML in there. But now we need to pull stuff up from the database. So let's go ahead and drop in our ASPX code again, right? And then why are they escaping it here again? Because they want to put it in a pipe. It's just a text character. So they got to close it. Put it in the pipe. Back and open it up again. Another directive. Close it again. A pipe. Open. Close. Now we're going back to HTML. Now we're going back to ASPX. So you see how messy that is? Now the problem with it is, and same thing that happens in PHP, right? Sometimes you forget to close something. Or you forget that semicolon or whatever it is, and boom, the stuff's not working, and it's a pain to trace it down. Yeah, we just call Aaron to help us. Thank you, Aaron. So it's a messy approach. It does work. This is the old school way. You want to put this in your application, folks? Still will work, no problem. The engine handles it. All right. Now let's take a look at the Razor approach. And unfortunately, it spans 2 pages, so it doesn't make it look as neat. But notice the only difference here is, instead of doing those delimiters, the bracket percent sign open and close, we just put the @ sign in front. Write our code, carry on with the HTML. @ sign, do our code, carry on with the pipe, right? And on and on and on. So it ends up being, basically the same exact code. It's cleaner. And then notice, just even hanging out here in space, there's a curly bracket to close, the method that we started up here. So that's really the Razor approach. So really the stuff that's sitting inside of it, if you want to stop and analyze it, really isn't different. It's just you're using that @ sign to get rid of all those delimiters. And yes, there are special Razor directives that don't exist in ASPX. It's true. And it can be a whole field of study, honestly. But the engine that sits inside of .NET handles it beautifully. So let's go on and let's try this example to get your feet wet with this process. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm moving this over to my second screen. And we're going to create a new project. So if you have the simple app still open in your browser, here's your opportunity to close that solution. So I'm going to go ahead and close solution. Sure, let's save it all. And now we're going to go ahead and create a new project. So go up to New, Project. We're going to make basically the same selection we typically make. So under C#, under Web, ASP.NET Web Application with a .NET framework, not the core, .NET. And you can see it includes MVC because that's what we want. In terms of naming this, we're going to name it MVC Razor Demo. I am not putting it in the default location. I'm putting it out in my OneDrive personally. Now let's select that folder and go ahead and click OK. Get to the next screen. We're going to choose empty in this case. We're going to put in the references for MVC. We are not worried about authentication at this point. Go ahead, say OK. All right, that gets us to the bottom of page 166. Now this is an empty application. There's nothing pre-created here. So in order to really get started, we do need to get a home controller in there at the very least to just have something to land on when the page launches. So in the controllers folder, go ahead and do a right click, choose add, and at the very top, it should say controller. Dialog comes up as per usual. We're going to go with empty in this case. Go ahead and click add. We're going to name this home. Click add. And now we're on to page 168 in the document. At this point, we've created the controller, but in order to be able to see something on the screen, what do we need to do? We need to add a view. Very good. So right-click inside the index method, anywhere, choose Add View. We can leave the defaults in there. We don't have a data model that we're working with. The view name of index is fine. We don't have a layout page that we're using at this point, so let's go ahead and uncheck that. That's not really the point here. And after you've clicked Add, you'll end up on the view page, which is your index.cs HTML file, which now has a home folder in the views folder, and there's the index page right there. All right. If you went ahead and ran this, and that's what they're asking us to do, so let's humor them and do it. What will you get on your page? Well, nothing. It's still loading right now, but it is actually going somewhere. But it's like creating a blank HTML document, because that's basically what we did. So, of course, nothing comes up on the screen. So, hey, what if the book was so polite as to give us some code to put in there? Okay, so that takes us to the bottom of page 170, where we're going to start copying some of that code. Now, interestingly, you guys should always do this when you're working with server-side code. Do yourself the favor of just doing a right-click and looking at the source code that's creating it. You can see that genuinely we do have an empty HTML document here. So it's got all the HTML structure, but nothing, absolutely nothing inside except for the title in there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the application. And still working inside the index.cs HTML file. You can get these output windows out of the way. We're going to add a little bit of content. So inside this div, we are going to create a for loop, kind of like the one that we saw. And if you want, if you're able to copy and paste from the PDF, wonderful. If not, start typing. Right? And good luck to you if you want to look at it that way. And I'm going to try to match the formatting in the book. And yes, I know that this isn't complete yet because it spans 2 pages. And then as I finish up this simple little code example here, I'm pasting in the closing div tag twice. That's not good. Tell me what this is going to do without looking at the tutorial document. You got to. Bingo. That's right. It's going to scroll through a loop from 0 to 12, and every time it goes through, we're setting an index value. I mean, we're calling it index, but it could be, chopped liver, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times when we write loops, we usually say I, right, for index values. And it's just going to output that each time. So go ahead and close, or excuse me, save that, and then run it. And this is, granted, very, very primitive example, similar to what we just saw as an example above, but we're doing our own thing. You want to ramp that up and add some HTML in there, you know, write some CSS to go with it, whatever you want to do. Want to do some fancy math? Try it. No harm done. Experiment and see how it works. But the whole point here is when you look at the output that's created, notice what it's doing. If you want to play with the code and make it do something a little bit more sophisticated, you know, you don't like a div here, you want to put in a paragraph? Hell, put in a paragraph. You want to like throw in some images, you want to CSS it, do whatever makes you happy, folks. And of course, you know, save it, run it, and see what it looks like. Now this is going to look basically the same, except they use the paragraph text, so there'll be a little bit more spacing between each number when it loads up. Experiment to your heart's content. Very simplistic Razor example. The point here isn't sophistication, the point is function. If you really want to learn Razor in depth, there really are entire tutorials and things on it. Usually they're intermingled tightly with standard ASP.NET stuff, but that basically wraps section 19. So this is a pretty quick and easy little assignment, but I would implore you that if you're creative to try to add some components to it. Just have some fun with it. You know, put some color in there, make different fonts, whatever you want to do, and make it work. All right, this video ends here, folks, and we are done.